IATA. Really pleased to welcome everybody here. Some of you have been here for many of these events in the past. A few of you are new, but for all of you, a big welcome from myself, my team, and everyone here at IATA. We know it's a busy time, we know you're busy people, and we really appreciate you spending a day with us to find out what we're doing and the work that important work we're doing to support our members in the airline industry. Before we get started, like everything in the airline industry, safety takes top priority. So we'll have a short video showing you some of the safety features of our building here in Geneva.
Welcome to IATA. This video outlines what you should do in the event of an emergency. You'll hear an alarm if there's a fire or another reason to evacuate the building. An announcement will give you instructions on what to do next. Don't panic. You should leave the building immediately, but you'll find help on hand to guide you. There will be members of IATA Emergency Response Team available to help. You'll recognize them by their green armbands. Make your way quickly but safely to the nearest emergency exit. There are 2 on each floor, one facing the airport and another next to the elevators. If you have any form of disability or think that you'll find evacuation difficult, please wait in the elevator hall for the fire service to help you. You must not use the elevators in the event of an emergency. Exit the building and make your way to the designated assembly points. These are clearly marked, one next to the arena and another on the airport side. Please wait here for further instructions. First aid kits are available in the reception areas as well as in the infirmary on the first floor. If you or someone you're with feels unwell or has an accident, simply dial 111 to contact the on-site security team. Thank you for your time and attention. Safety and security is everyone's responsibility.
Super. Hopefully we'll have a safe day today, but just a few other housekeeping announcements before we get started. For those who need the washroom facilities, they're not on this floor, they're 1 floor below. Use the main staircase and you'll see them on your left-hand side at the end of the staircase. If you need adapters, we've got a few at the back, so please see my team who are at the back of the room. For presentations, Wi-Fi, all of that, logistical stuff on each table. There's a piece of paper that looks like this. And on that you will find the code for the Wi-Fi. You'll also find our hashtag IATAGMD for today. And you'll also find out how to access the media kit, which will be progressively filled as we go through the day. We're trying not to print too much paper this year. We will print the Outlook release and distribute that in the room. Aside from that, all of the other releases, all of the other information, fact sheets, backgrounders, all of that kind of stuff, you'll find in the digital press kit, the instructions of which are all contained in that document. And just one very important thing, I know we all live in a world where social media is extremely important, particularly for people in communications. We'd like to create a small social media respite or bubble in this room until 10:30 this morning. Okay? 10:30, which will be the end of the opening session. During that, if we could please embargo everything that goes on in this room. No social media, no reporting, nothing like that. It'll give us all a chance to listen, to go through the documentation, to prepare, and then at 10:30 we can reemerge into the regular world and hashtag IATA GMD and go for it. Feel free to do your job after 10:30, but before that, if you could please kind of have an embargo on everything that takes place in this room, that would be much appreciated. So with that, just a quick note on the program. It's a little bit different than we've had in previous years. We've kind of unbundled it to give you some choice of some of the areas that we might want to go deeper into. The core program is going to look at the outlook, look at sustainability, and look at digitalization efforts in the airline industry. And then we've got some deep dive briefings, which we'll talk about as we get close to them at lunchtime. and then one at 4 o'clock this afternoon, and they'll cover topics like safety, turbulence aware, slots, a deep dive into some of the roadmaps that we prepared towards net zero, etc. So as we move through the day, we'll get more information on that. In the meantime, it's a pleasure for me to welcome my colleague Andrew Matters, who's Director of Policy and Economics, here to talk about some recent research that we've participated in, which is looking at how do we quantify the value of aviation. So, Andrew, over to you.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Tony. Good morning, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you all today. And it's great to see a packed house despite the early start and the Geneva winter weather. As Tony mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about the value of aviation. Now, this is a topic that we have visited in the past. Can I just get a show of hands to start with? How many people in this room are familiar with the VOA work that we've done previously? I know that there's a few of you because I recognise a number of the faces from previous years. So there's a few. Okay, good. There's a lot of people that didn't put up their hand. So that makes me feel good about my first slide today, which is looking at what exactly do we mean by the value of aviation. I think this provides a little bit of context to some of the detail that's going to come in following slides. There's a bit of a simplistic view out there that aviation is just about moving stuff from one place to another. From point A to point B. That stuff can be people, it can be cargo. And of course, our industry does it quickly and we do it safely. But nonetheless, there's that very narrow view of what aviation is exactly. The message that we want to get across to you today is that aviation is so much more than just that. Aviation underpins global economic development, prosperity, and opportunity. It's an industry that is unlike any other. I don't think there's too many people in the room today that will disagree with that view. You can see I've listed a few things on this slide which try to give you a bit of an indication of the breadth that we think about when we consider the value of aviation and how we try and put that together. This by no means is an exhaustive list, but I think it gives you a good sense of where we're coming from today. Aviation is about the virtual bridges in the sky, the global interconnectedness, if you like, that only aviation is able to provide. That's what drives this economic value that we're going to talk about. This slide, I think, captures very neatly the three key numbers taken from this latest piece of research. These numbers relate to 2023. And in 2023, around 86.5 million jobs were supported by aviation worldwide. Aviation contributes $4.1 trillion worth of global economic activity. And just to avoid any confusion, 1 trillion is 1,000 billion. So we're talking about $4,000 billion worth of economic activity that is supported by our industry. When you put all of that together and think about that in the context of global GDP, it accounts for almost 4% of total global economic activity, or GDP. Now, if you think about aviation as a country, aviation would be in the top 20 largest countries, if you listed them in order. It would come in at about number 20. To put that into some sort of context, it's a similar size to a country like the Netherlands, or Saudi Arabia, or Switzerland. It's not an insubstantial contribution that aviation makes to global economic activity and global economic development. For those of you that are familiar with the previous work that we've done on the value of aviation, I need to make one quick point. It's an important point. The methodology that's been used in this analysis for 2023 has evolved since the work that we did before. The last study we did on this was prior to the COVID pandemic. So the analysis here today is more robust, it's more comprehensive, if you like, but that means it's not immediately comparable to the numbers that we produced previously. So anybody familiar with that past work, it's not straightforward to compare the two. So just bear that in mind. As it says on this slide, these numbers are created for 2023. And I think it's worth just taking a quick step back to remember exactly where the industry was in 2023. You can see that we were still recovering from the pandemic. The pandemic was well behind us, but industry activity hadn't gotten to those pre-pandemic levels throughout the course of 2023. And that's an important factor because it goes to the magnitude of some of the numbers that you'll see. So for example, if we were to redo the numbers for this year, for 2024, obviously we haven't got those numbers yet, but if we were to redo them, given the trajectory that you see here, the fact that aviation has continued to move forward, we would expect those jobs and GDP numbers for 2024 to be higher than what I've told you for 2023. So just bear that in mind, that broad circumstance of the industry's recovery, it is an important factor in how we think about and how we interpret those numbers for 2023. Now, there are a couple of different ways that we can look at these numbers. We can slice and dice them, thinking about how we got to these global totals. And on this slide, we're showing the total number of jobs in green on the left-hand side, the 86.5 million. In blue, we're showing the total amount of value-added contribution, so the contribution to GDP in blue. On the far right, you can see the four categories which build up to those global totals. They're not immediately intuitive, so let me very quickly just run through what each of those four categories are. The aviation direct segment is what we think of as really the core aviation supply chain, I guess. So that includes airlines, it includes airports, it includes all of the people engaged working at the airports, it includes ANSPs, the air navigation service providers, and it also includes the manufacturers, engine manufacturers, airframe manufacturers, parts manufacturers. All of that is captured in the aviation direct segment. And you can see here the contribution that makes, around 11.6 million jobs and $1.1 trillion worth of economic activity. The indirect segment there builds on the direct component. Those direct businesses, the core aviation supply chain, go and purchase goods and services from other parts of the economy. That creates jobs and it creates economic activity more broadly across the economy. And you can see another substantial contribution there. More than 20 million jobs and around $1.2 trillion worth of economic activity. The third category is induced. And the induced activity, again, comes back from that core aviation direct component. Those people that are employed in the aviation direct segment get paid a wage. And they use that wage to fund their lifestyle, in effect. So they're going out, they're taking that salary that's earned in their job and spreading that throughout the economy as well. That's the induced impact. And again, 17.2 million jobs and more than $900 billion worth of economic activity. The final component here is a little bit tricky. This one's a little bit different to those first three components because we know that around 58% of total international tourists arrive to their destination by air. All of those tourists, once again, spend money on goods and services while they're travelling. That creates jobs, it creates economic activity. Again, that's a broader, a wider impact on the economy that is enabled by the aviation sector. So we incorporate that in aviation's value as well. 37.3 million jobs there, and almost $970 billion worth of economic activity. You sum those figures up, you get the global totals. There is, of course, another way to cut these data, and that's by region. So once again, before we get to those regional numbers, let's take a look at where we were exactly in 2023 at the regional level. Now this chart's a little bit messy. There's a lot of lines here, there's a lot going on. What's interesting here is although the industry total didn't get back to its pre-COVID levels in 2023, some of the regions did. And you can see there are 3 regions that by the end of 2023 are up above that horizontal axis line. I guess the standout on this chart is the pink line, the Asia Pacific, and the gap between Asia Pacific and those other regions. I think we all understand the reasons why there was a lagged recovery that we saw in Asia Pacific. But you can see it very clearly here. That gap has continued to close, of course, through 2024. That's good news, but you can see the impact here in 2023. And once again, these recovery profiles are reflected in the regional splits that we have. Now, the chart that I just showed you, which has jobs and GDP split by the 4 different components, we can do that at the regional level as well. If we do that, we get something that looks like this, which is a horrible, horrible slide to put up for you. Now, let me explain this. I've included it in the deck because the publication is over 100 pages long, so to save you looking through that publication to find these numbers, because I know that there's a lot of interest in these regional splits, it's all here on the slide. I'm not actually going to talk to this. I've got a better way, I think, of showing you this information. But because we're going to share these slides with you, I've put it all together for you here. So don't worry about this one. It's for your ongoing reference. Let me try and show things a slightly different way. The key takeaway here is when we look at jobs and GDP, they're not distributed equally across regions. And there are plenty of region-specific factors and industry-specific factors within the regions and within countries that go to explaining these numbers. You'll recall that on slide 3, we talked about the total number of jobs, the amount of GDP, and then the share of global GDP. We're replicating that same structure here on this slide. The first pie chart on the left-hand side shows you how jobs are split. So we've taken that global total number of jobs, 86.4 million jobs, sorry, 86.5 million jobs, and we've shown there the regional splits. And almost half of those jobs are located in the Asia Pacific region. Europe is the second largest component there. In the middle, we're looking at GDP splits. And you can see that the splits for GDP and jobs are quite different. When we look at jobs, there's a much more even distribution across the 3 key air transport markets in the world. So it's Asia Pacific, it's North America, and it's Europe that take the lion's share of contribution to total GDP. And the final chart on this slide, the chart on the right-hand side, shows the percentage point contribution to get to that 3.9% of total global GDP. And once again, as we saw in that second pie chart, the main contribution comes from Asia Pacific, from Europe, and from North America, in building up to that 3.9% of GDP. This is the last slide I have for you today. These publications are available to be downloaded. We've talked about the global and regional data. That can be found in the Aviation Benefits Beyond Borders report. Again, I know that's a publication that a number of you will be familiar with. As I mentioned, it's just over 100 pages long, so it doesn't just have the jobs and GDP numbers. There's a lot more information there that is of interest, covering a wide range of topics. Importantly, and something we haven't spoken about today, are the country level assessments. So we've taken these global jobs and GDP numbers and we've broken them out. And in the last couple of weeks, the team has put together just over 80 individual country reports. So we take the jobs, we take the GDP numbers, we take a whole bunch of other important aviation indicators, including affordability, including connectivity, and we put those together in individual country level reports. Those reports are being uploaded as I speak, so they may not all be there just yet. They will be by the end of the day. We're getting them up as soon as we can, but we think there's a real value, not only to our regional teams, but also to people in this room from those country level reports as well. Tony, I think I've worn out my welcome. Let me leave it there for now. I'm happy to come back to take questions during morning tea or over lunch if anybody has them. I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. So again, all of that data will be available on IATA.org towards the end of the day, including, as Andrew said, the country-specific data. Now, before we get into looking at the outlook for this year, I'd like to ask our Director General, Willie Walsh, my boss, a couple of questions looking back at 2024 to sort of get a sense as to where Willie thinks we are as an industry as we head into 2025. So, Willie, first question would be, you've seen Andrew's presentation on the value of aviation. Looking back at the year, do you think that governments have appreciated the value that aviation creates in some of the policies and activities we've seen over the past 12 months?
Thanks, Tony, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in Geneva. I think it would be fair to say that not all governments fully appreciate the economic contribution that aviation makes. It does depend on where you are in the world. I find regions of the world where there's significant interest in expanding their aviation activities, not just airline connectivity, but also related industry. The one I tend to highlight quite a lot is India, where we were seeing significant growth in the Indian domestic market, and you will have seen the aircraft orders announced by Indigo and recently by Air India, and the ambition that these carriers have. And those ambitions, I think, are founded on realistic expectations for the way the market is going to grow. You combine that with the investment that the Indian government is making in airport infrastructure, and what you can see there is a clear recognition that for India to fully exploit the economic opportunities that exist there, they will heavily depend on air connectivity. They also recognize that there are significant related industries, particularly MRO, where India can take advantage of the skilled labour that they have, and we're seeing quite a lot of interest in developing maintenance repair facilities in India as well. So I contrast that with the Netherlands, where still today the government is trying to restrict the movements at Schiphol Airport, which in my opinion demonstrates a clear failure on the part of the government there to understand the importance of the hub airport and the connectivity, the value that creates for the Netherlands, not just in terms of the direct connectivity that Thomsen has that it wouldn't have if not for the hub activities. I think it really does depend on where you are. So I think these studies highlighting the full socio-economic benefit of aviation, not just of the airline industry, but of the wider aviation industry, are very important. And it is very encouraging when we travel to different parts of the world and see governments that are very ambitious and keen to generate the benefits that many regions in the world, including Europe and the US, probably takes for granted because they've had these benefits for so long.
Okay, thank you, Willie. Over the year, we've talked a lot about how the industry is growing and growing quite healthily. Do you think that the infrastructure is keeping pace with the needs of the industry and the demands of travelers and shippers?
I think it's clear that the air traffic navigation providers have not kept pace with the growth in the industry, which is disappointing given that they had an opportunity to reset during the COVID period. The COVID period was interesting in that it demonstrated the full value of the industry's ability to fly from A to B without reference to any ground-based navigation aids, because there was pretty much no restriction in terms of where aircraft could fly. So we were able to demonstrate that the technology exists, as we've argued for many years, that aircraft are equipped. We've invested significant sums of money to ensure that we can do that. The restriction we face continues to be the if you like, fragmented approach to air traffic control, particularly in areas like Europe. To some degree in the US, although the issue there is slightly different in that it's principally around the resources available. But we are seeing significant parts of the world where I think there is scope for enhancement in ATC, which would facilitate more capacity, facilitate shorter journeys, better environmental performance, lower cost. And it's disappointing that we've not seen those opportunities being taken advantage of. Airports, I think after the very difficult period following the resumption of growth coming out of the pandemic, to be fair, most of them have got their act together. But it's clear that airport infrastructure in Europe in particular is not keeping pace with the projected growth that we see. That's different to the Asian Pacific region, where we're seeing significant investment in airport infrastructure. So again, I think it depends on where you are in the world. The biggest frustration, and maybe you're going to talk about this or ask me about this, is with the supply chain, particularly in relation to the airframe and engine manufacturers, which is causing huge frustration on the part of the industry. And I think that's probably a bigger impediment at the moment to the infrastructure that we've traditionally talked about, because without question the disruption to the supply chain and the failure on the part of Boeing, Airbus, GE, Rolls-Royce, Pratt & Whitney to deliver the products that they promised is a cause of major concern, because despite the fact that it doesn't appear to be getting any worse, there's no evidence of it getting better. And we now see this disruption continuing for quite a number of years. I've listened to people saying that they don't believe the OEMs can get back on track until the end of the decade. And that's assuming everything goes in their favor. So I think that's going to be a major challenge for the industry going forward. It certainly was a factor in 2024 and did restrict the growth that a number of airlines pursued, because they didn't have confidence in their ability to operate the fleet that they have because of the limitation on spare parts, but also very little confidence in getting the aircraft that they'd ordered. So I think that's going to be an issue. Certainly was an issue in 2024. I think it's going to be a big issue as we go forward.
Then maybe another look at a potential constraint on the industry is we're working in a world now where significant amounts of airspace are closed to airlines. We've also seen in some cases a rollback on some of the screening equipment that's in the airports. How would you characterize the year in terms of how we're approaching security?
Yeah, I think again it demonstrates the resilience of the industry. The change in the security arrangements, we were all looking forward to the removal on the liquids restriction. It was unfortunate that there was a, if you like, I'll call it a hiccup, because we still fully believe that that issue will be resolved, and certainly the evidence available to us suggests that the equipment is capable of screening to the required level, but it requires some adjustment, and that work is ongoing. So I remain optimistic that we will see the liquid restrictions removed in in due course. The closure of airspace has put significant pressure on the available airspace. But again, I think the industry responds very quickly to any threat of security implications as a result of the various unrest that we've seen in certain parts of the world, the war in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, the issues in Lebanon, and then what has been happening in the wider Middle East as well. So all of these issues have put quite a bit of stress on the infrastructure, and we've seen airlines having to respond by reducing their network and their schedules. A number of European carriers, as you know, have decided to reduce their presence in China and certain other parts of Asia as a result of the closure of Russian airspace. So it's been a problem, but I think, again, great credit to the airlines in demonstrating their ability to overcome these challenges and continue to exploit the growth opportunities that have been available to them.
Okay. Another topic that we've talked a lot about over the past several years, in fact, is gender diversity in the industry, and IATA has had its 25 by 2025 initiative. That will come to a conclusion next year. How would you characterize progress in that area across the industry?
I think progress has been good. It's clear we will hit that target, and I think that's pleasing to see. It's probably been a little bit accelerated in 2024, which again is good. It can't be the end of the story because we recognise as an industry that access to talent, recruiting and retaining people is a challenge for every industry, but it's a particular challenge for our industry given the lack of gender diversity that has existed. So we continue to look for opportunities to demonstrate that this is an industry that is attractive to everybody. We haven't made as much progress in the areas of technical skills staff, pilots, mechanics, engineers as I would have hoped. I think the period of the pandemic damaged some of the progress that we had been making. But there's a clear determination on the part of the industry to continue with the progress that we've made, because we recognise it's something that we have to do. For our industry to be successful in the future, attracting new talent into the industry is a must-do. And given the perception of our industry being male-dominated in a number of critical areas, which I think reflects the reality of the past. I'm not so sure it reflects what can be the future. Because without doubt, there is no reason why we can't see greater proportions of female pilots, female mechanics, female engineers. We just need to convince people, both men and women, that there's opportunities for women in these roles and to continue building on the progress that has been made in recent years. So I think it's a good story. I think setting that target of 25 by 2025 was a good initiative. It's not just about ticking a box. I think it's about changing an attitude and changing a culture. And attitude and culture change can take a long time, but I think we're on the right road. And I'm optimistic that we'll continue to see improvements as we go forward.
Okay. Willie, you spoke about change. Looking back at the past 12 months, I think we've seen a huge amount of political change around the world. A new European Parliament, new administration coming in the US. What do you think those changes will mean for the prospects of the airline industry going forward?
Yeah, 2024 was clearly a year of very significant change. I think we've got to look at this as an opportunity. I've been talking quite a lot recently about the Draghi report, which I think is is very important. Europe does need to recognise, and I think this report was a public recognition of the need for Europe to be more competitive on a global scale. I've been critical of Europe for many years with the fixation on competition within the single market, and often at the expense of Europe's competitiveness globally. And I think the report by Mario Draghi highlights both the risk and the opportunity that exists there. So I'm hopeful with the change in the Commission, with the change in the Parliament in the EU, that there is an opportunity to change the direction of travel and to address these significant issues. I think if you look at the Trump administration the first time around, you would have to acknowledge that that was positive and supportive of the airline industry in the US. I think President Trump moved very quickly to secure the survival of the industry there through the CARES Act. And that certainly helped to stabilize the US industry well ahead of any other airlines in the global operation. So if you consider the airlines that benefited from the CARES Act support, they're clearly in a strong financial position today. I think the approach of the Biden administration to regulation has been worrying. It probably mirrored the appetite that Europe has for introducing regulation. It seems that there are politicians in certain parts of the world who believe the answer to every challenge is to regulate. I disagree with that. I think in many cases the regulations that we've seen have been unhelpful and have not benefited consumers or the industry. And I believe at this stage the indication is that the second Trump administration is likely to reverse some of the actions that were taken under the Biden administration. And I would see that as a positive. So I think there is a role for regulation. We've always acknowledged that. But over-regulating or regulating to address every single issue makes it a very complex industry. And I think regulators have not fully appreciated the damage that many of these regulations do to consumers and undermines the potential value, economic value, the socio-economic value of the airline industry. So, as I said, looking at this, I think you'd have to hope that this is a positive on a net basis going forward into 2025 and beyond.
Okay. And just one more question before we ask Marie to come and help us look ahead into 2025. And that would be on, I think, the industry's biggest challenge right now, which is decarbonization. Do you think over the course of 2024 we made as much progress as you were hoping? Particularly, do we have SAF at levels that we were anticipating, etc.?
No, we're not making as much progress as we'd hoped for, and we're certainly not making as much progress as we need. While we were waiting to start there, I was just reading the report from IATA, which just came out in relation to SAF in the EU, and I think the executive summary is that there will be sufficient SAF produced in Europe to meet the refuel EU requirement of 6% by 2030, although it does challenge whether there will be sufficient synthetic fuels being produced. Again, I don't think this issue is being addressed in a coordinated fashion by politicians. I think they believe that by making statements and passing laws and regulation that the issue would be addressed. There's little evidence that that is the case. I'm not as optimistic as IATA is in their report that the EU will be able to meet the requirements by 2030. And even if it does just happen to meet the 2030, I think the 2035 and 2040 targets are going to be extremely difficult to achieve unless there's a change in the approach. We had seen significant progress in the US with the Inflation Reduction Act and there's clear evidence that that has incentivized the additional production of sustainable fuels or investment in the facilities to produce sustainable fuels. So we need governments to recognise that they have a huge role to play in this. This can't happen just by the airline industry on our own. It must involve everybody, every player, in ensuring that we can achieve a critical target of net zero in 2050. And we need to start building on the slow progress that we've seen. We had expected that to improve in 2024. We're not at the levels, even though those levels are very, very small, but we're not where we'd hoped to be coming towards the end of 2024. And we need to see greater awareness on part of governments around the world of the role that they must play in ensuring that we can get greater production of sustainable aviation fuel. And it is important to point out that although we talk about sustainable aviation fuel, we're not just talking about fuel that will be used for the airline industry. It's these facilities will produce sustainable fuels that can be used for road transport and other industries. So we're not asking for facilities to be developed solely to produce SAF, because that would be inefficient. So this is not just about the airline industry. This is about the transition, the global transition to a net zero economy, a net zero world in 2050, with sustainable aviation fuel assisting the aviation industry. But the same facilities that will produce sustainable aviation fuel will be producing sustainable fuel for road transport and for other industries. And I think that bit has been missed. I don't think there's been a full acknowledgement or a full understanding that that is the case when we're talking to some regulators and politicians who believe we're asking for something special for the airline industry. We're not. We're just asking for the same support as other industries have achieved in their transition to net zero.
Great, thanks very much, Will. With that, I'd like to invite Marie Owens Thomsen, Senior Vice President for Sustainability and Chief Economist, to present her outlook on the industry going into 2025.
Thank you very much, Tommy. So yeah, this is a room full of journalists, and I clearly need help getting the mic going, but I don't need to tell you how important the news cycle is, and how turbulent it is on a daily basis. And we try in our analysis of the global economy and of course our industry to somehow slice through that to a certain extent and find the dominant factor that will drive us forward. And what is sort of the dominant factor in 2025 that is radically different from where we come from? And we would purport that that dominant factor is the lower price of oil. Now, this is where we are at the moment. The blue line is the nominal price of crude oil, and in red you have the real price of crude oil. So that is obviously the price of crude oil minus the rate of inflation. And basically we are now $20 lower than we were a year ago and than we were earlier this year as well. So $20 is not an insignificant move. And I would argue, based on econometrics by the eye, shall we say, that around $80 is a bit of a cutoff for the impact that the oil price has on the global economy. Above $80, the oil price is, generally speaking, mostly negative for the global business cycle. And below $80, it flips and becomes much more positive for the global business cycle. So here we are, clearly having made a shift from where it weighed on growth to this current state where it now is more growth supported. And two major things that have happened here. So first of all, there is a structural change going on, as was, of course, mentioned also by Willie, where the demand profile for refined products is changing. And notably China is switching its long-haul truck industry to being fueled by gas, liquid natural gas, non-refined product, which reduces the demand for diesel at the refinery and has weighed on the price of oil products, obviously. So China is obviously not the only place where this is happening, but it has a large impact because of the size of the economy. And the other big thing that has happened, also weighing on the oil price, is another thing that Willie mentioned, which is, of course, all these elections that we've had this year, none more important than the US election. So the drill baby drill mantra is in all likelihood going to continue to make sure that the oil market remains oversupplied. Yeah, and this is why we have these lower oil prices. Now, for once, we think that this is actually going to benefit not only the global economy and support a stable growth rate, but it will also benefit our industry, because thanks to the vacated production space at the refinery, when people now produce less diesel, there is more space at the refinery to produce jet, and that helps the price of jet fuel to come down. So here you see in yellow the price of Brent, in blue the price of jet, and in red the difference between the two. So we're very grateful for having returned to some $15 a barrel difference between the two, and that brings us back to sort of the more normal historic range of somewhere sort of between 15 or between 10 and $20 a barrel. And we have, hopefully forever turned our backs on this crazy period in 22, when the spread was as high as $60, and that was obviously very penalizing for our industry. So this is on balance good news. And as I have mentioned, it will help stabilize it puts like a floor under the global GDP growth rate. Now, that floor has been very much provided by the labor markets, the red hot labor markets that we still have in most places. Record low unemployment rates, more people work in the global economy than ever before. But that is likely to wane a bit. That support is going to lessen going forward. And we are, again, very grateful that we then think that the oil price can replace that and make sure that we deliver a growth rate in the vicinity of 3% for the coming years. So capacity constraints then were also mentioned earlier, and they are unfortunately something that will probably prevent us from deriving the full benefit of this stable growth rate. And here, these data are aircraft deliveries by region produced by Cirium. No shade on Cirium, but what they do is that they just take the undelivered aircraft numbers and push them out to the next years. Yeah, so there's no real analysis in those forecasts. And I would say that the 25, 26 numbers shown here are very unlikely to actually occur. So when airlines can't get aircraft, obviously, given our already record high load factors, it's going to be very difficult for airlines to maximize on the otherwise reasonably positive global backdrop provided on the macroeconomic side. And not only do these delays prevent us from maximizing the services that we provide, it also prevents us from renewing our global fleet. And renewing the global fleet is, of course, a historic quest of our industry. Ever since our birth, we have strived to fly more efficiently, using less fuel. That is obviously in our self-interest, and on top of it, it is also necessary for us to be able to arrive at net zero CO2 emissions in 2050. So all of these bottlenecks in the supply chain are preventing us to do so, from doing so. And therefore there's this horrible choice that if I want to serve my customers, I need to bring back an old aircraft into service that I thought that I was going to retire because I haven't received my new aircraft. So this is clearly not the choice of the airlines that we now have the highest average age per aircraft that we are seeing on this chart. Yeah, the average is 13.6 years, and we now exceed that with 14.8 years average life of the current fleet in 2024. So this is another way in which our supply chain is preventing us from achieving our goals as it currently stands. Nevertheless, traffic is solid given this reasonably favorable macroeconomic backdrop, and we can see how, of course, we had very strong growth as we came out of the pandemic. That growth rate has moderated as we go forward, but the red line here is the international that still has to come up a bit. The domestic has led throughout this period since 2022. And now we have a new little phenomenon, which is that cargo has actually flipped above domestic. So that's great that cargo is back after a bit of a lull over 22, 23. So in total terms is what you see in the dotted line. And per region, this is what it looks like in terms of the growth in passenger on the one hand in blue. RPKs stand for revenue passenger kilometers, and in red you have the growth in cargo per region, and CTK stands for cargo ton kilometers. This is the way that we usually measure our activity level. So here you clearly see that Asia Pacific is leading the whole industry in terms of the growth rates on both cargo and passenger, and the Middle East is also making a very significant contribution in terms of growth, notably on the cargo side. And the more mature markets are obviously lagging, giving us a whole industry performance which is in the low double digits, but still in the double digits, which I think is, of course, absolutely phenomenal. And this little extra boost to cargo that we just saw, where cargo has again flipped up above domestic traffic, is very much connected to this evolution. So this is the relative price of air cargo versus maritime shipping fees. And you can see that we're now sort of in the same degree of competitiveness, of relative competitiveness, as we were during the cargo heydays, if I can put it that way, in 21. So as this curve goes down, air cargo becomes more competitive compared to shipping, and as it increases, shipping becomes more competitive than air cargo. So this is, we have to admit, our industry profiting from the disruptions related to, very much related to what's happening in the Middle East, the Red Sea, the Panama Canal, etc., that has made it very difficult for maritime to be as competitive as they were previously. So all of this gives us a financial performance, which I think is absolutely worth, popping the champagne. Yeah, we think that we will exceed $1 trillion in terms of revenue in 2025. Now, of course, costs at 940 billion are important, but they still leave us an operating profit, we think, of 67.5 billion. And you have some other key numbers at the bottom of this chart that you can consult later. And when we look at net, which tends to be, I think, the main focus, is then our profit is 36.6 billion net, and that gives us a profit margin of 3.6%. Now, 3.6 is not bad for our industry yet. I think we've never had a net profit margin much above 5. Yeah. So really, it's not a bad profit margin, but in normal I come from banking, right? So, when I talk to clients in the past and try to orient them towards industries that they should invest in, we obviously try to orient them towards industries that earn a double-digit net profit margin. So we are in the utility slice of net profit margins, and that is clearly too low in order for us to be as robust as we need to be, not only for our industry, but also for the rest of our value chain, who obviously all depend upon us. This is the revenue split, where the red is the passenger segment, blue is cargo, and yellow is ancillaries. So clearly the passenger segment is what's generating the most of our profits. And here we see, the stellar performance that we've actually managed to pull off in this amazing industry of ours, where in the space of 3 years, we've managed to come up again at the sort of in line with historic performance. That's a very swift turnaround, and I don't know of any other industry where I've seen a similar performance. Per region, we get this picture where North America is the most profitable, followed by Europe, the Middle East, Asia Pacific, Latin America, and Africa in that order. But when we then look at per passenger, it's quite interesting to see that the order is slightly modified. So per passenger, the Middle East is earning almost $24, and North America almost 12, Europe 9, and these three are above the industry average of $7 per passenger. And the three regions that then therefore are below the industry average are Latin America, Asia Pacific, and Africa. Africa happily eking out a profit, but a slim $1 per passenger profit. So, yeah. Anyway, the reason why we show coffee beans here is that we do like to talk about our profits, our per passenger profits, in terms of how much a cup of coffee costs in different places. So now I think with $7 per passenger, maybe we can afford a large latte in Geneva with that price. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Marie. So now we have some time for questions. We have a good amount of time for questions, actually. So if you could follow the normal custom of raising your hand, identifying yourself with the question, we'll move through those as quickly as we can. And my only other, I suppose, comment before we get into that would be that we are still under embargo. So the embargo is at 10:30, so we still have another hour in the fall. So maybe we'll start with the question here in front. If you press the microphone, wait till it turns green, and then you're ready to go.
Good morning, everyone. This is Andreas, FEW Hamburg, addressing Willie. It concerns the level playing field, especially for European carriers. We touched that already a little bit about the Russian airspace closed for them, and Chinese carriers continue to raise their profit from that. Do you see any movement on that, especially in respect to the new EU Commission and Parliament, that they acknowledge that?
No, I don't. I'm not sure that the EU has a vehicle through which they could address that. We talk about the level playing field. I think Mari's presentation would demonstrate to you that there isn't a level playing field globally. There are different challenges in different parts of the world. So our view as IATA is that we would like to see a situation where Russian airspace becomes available to everybody. It's not a security or safety issue. We have aircraft from different parts of the world flying through Russian airspace today with both passengers and cargo without incident. This is a political issue and will require a political solution. But I go back to what I said earlier. I think we would prefer to see airspace open for everybody rather than closing more and more airspace to people. So I don't see that this issue can be addressed in a way that will satisfy people in the short term, and I think we all have to remain optimistic that we will see peace in this region, that the war in Ukraine will end, and that we'll get back to a situation where Russian airspace is available to all airlines to use again in the future.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we'll stay in the front.
Hi, Joanna Kuczynska from Reuters. I have a question just about the supply chain issues, if you could elaborate on what can realistically be done to speed up that waiting period for airlines when it comes to waiting for engines, for planes. What tangible steps can companies take to improve that?
Yeah, so we're doing some work to try and improve the situation, but really it's only around the edges. There's very little that we can do at this stage. What we need to do is to pile the pressure onto the manufacturers to resolve these issues. We've been patient, we've given them time. I think our patience has run out. The situation is unacceptable. We're not seeing sufficient effort being put into addressing this issue. It's now got to the stage where, as you saw from Mario's presentation, airlines are being forced to retain aircraft that they don't want to operate. Airlines are paying way above the odds for aircraft that they're now leasing because they can't get the aircraft that they've ordered to buy. Aircraft are staying on the ground far longer than they used to because the performance of the engines in particular are nowhere near where they should be. It's not much point having fantastic new technology engines if we have to keep taking them off the wing and putting them into a repair shop. And what we're seeing now is that engines are spending far more time in the shop being repaired than they used to historically. Aircraft are having to fly older than they used to. Airlines are having to lease and purchase even aircraft that they wouldn't normally consider operating because of this situation, and it's completely unacceptable. So, I think it reflects the fact that to some degree we're dealing with quasi-monopoly suppliers, and I think that's an issue that we need to look at. I've been in the past clear that there were certain suppliers abusing their dominant position. I think there could well be evidence that this is a case of these suppliers being able to abuse their dominant position. And you have to wonder, is it in their interest to continue with these supply chain problems? Because they're the ones who have caused the problem, but they're also benefiting to a significant degree from the problem that they've caused. And it's at the expense of the airline industry. So quite honestly, I think we've got to a stage where we've had enough. We've been patient, we've given them time to sort it out. They haven't sorted it out. There's no evidence that they are sorting it out. So I think we're going to have to ramp up the pressure and maybe look for support to force these suppliers to get their act together, because it's just not good enough the way they are at the moment.
Okay, question here.
Good morning, it's Christiana. Christiana with the German press agency. I wonder whether you could explain why the net profit per passenger has gone down, or maybe the better question would be why it was so high last year. Thank you.
Well, it wasn't so high. We've gone from, what was it, $6.40, $6.70 to $7. So, in terms of net profit per passenger, it's nowhere near where we would want to be to ensure that we have an industry that is financially stable. We are making progress. I think when we look at the parts that are moving, obviously fuel costs have traditionally been the highest single cost. That's now being overtaken by labour costs in 2015, where we projected to be slightly higher. Fuel costs at 24.6% and labour at 24.9%. So I think it demonstrates, the challenge that the industry faced through the post-COVID environment where there was significant pressure on labour costs, and that's now, if you like, embedded in the industry. The new aircraft technology is not giving us the benefit that we would have expected because we're not getting those aircraft. We are doing, I think, an extremely good job in continuing to drive higher seat factors. 83.4, that'll be a record for the industry. We're at record seat factors now. So I think it is a demonstration of what the industry can do within things that they can control ourselves. But the big challenge we face is the cost pressures in areas where we don't have control, and this tends to centre around suppliers that are monopolies or quasi-monopolies and have the ability to exercise their monopolistic powers to increase charges in a way that a competitive industry like the airline industry just can't do. I don't know if you want to comment.
Yeah, sure. I think I object respectfully a little bit the high, how high the profit per passenger is, and I don't know, depends on where you live, maybe, and culturally and so on. But if you go out and eat, you will certainly tip your waiter $7. I would predict, for multiple times, yeah. And just think about that when you board the plane. That's all that you're sort of really managing to support the airlines with. That is clearly not enough for this industry. So indeed, we are sort of squeezed in this very strange value chain of ours, where everything upstream is oligopolistic or monopolistic, yeah, airports and all the other parts of the upstream value chain, where that means that we have no influence on their pricing power. They have full price setting power. And then downstream, we also face this crazy hyper-competitive environment where a passenger, a traveler can discover everybody's prices on every route at any point in time. Again, in my past, in the financial markets, we obviously have in financial markets these screens where you see the prices go up and down all day long. But never in our wildest imagination would we ever think of turning that screen the other way around and show the customer. Yeah. So downstream, we also lose pricing power then because of this hyper-competitive environment. And that does mean that, as a rule, we in the middle tend to have the lowest profits in the whole value chain. These are round numbers, but I think we can think of the oil sector as earning 20% profits, net profit margins, leasing 50%, I would guess, at the current point in time, and so on and so forth. And we're the ones that sit here with the low single-digit net profit margins. So clearly, there's a problem with the distribution of the value of the activity that we manage to produce jointly, and indeed how to rectify that is the gazillion $1 million question.
Great, question here.
Yes, hello, good morning everybody. Jérôme Dutel from La Gemfleet, Switzerland. Could you be a little bit more specific talking about SAFs, about what is the difference between the stated goals and the actual reality that you are seeing in the near future?
Yeah, so we are clearly focused on the long term for sustainable aviation fuel. That's important to say. We don't believe it will be a linear growth between the fuel that's produced in 2024 and the fuel in 2025. We expect to see exponential growth as we go into maybe the period 2035 and beyond. The problem that we're seeing is that we need to get building these facilities today. There's a couple of things we can do. We can use existing refineries and co-process. That today is limited to 5%, but has the potential to increase to 30%. So clearly, that would have a major impact on the capital expenditure required if we can use existing refineries, where we can increase the limit on co-processing from 5% to 30%. That would be a very positive development. And to me, that's more around regulation than science. So, I think that's something that could be achieved reasonably quickly. Where we have not seen as much progress as we would have liked was in the investment in new biorefineries. It takes probably around 5 years from start to getting that up to production. So, when we're looking at what we expect to see in 2030, we're now looking at, we want to see the foundations being built so that we can have confidence that these facilities will be there producing sustainable fuels in 2030. So the US certainly led the way with the incentives, both state and federal, which provided a major boost to investment in infrastructure for sustainable facilities in the United States. In Europe, we haven't seen the same approach. Europe has sort of taken the stick approach, where they've introduced mandates and believe that if they mandate you to buy something, that provides an incentive to somebody to produce it. But that hasn't happened. The other big problem I think we need to call out is the fuel producers today, the big fuel producers who made great announcements and looked for lots of plaudits, Shell and BP included, have withdrawn, if you like, or have pulled back from the commitments that they made in terms of producing sustainable fuels. And they need to play their part. We can't just rely on new entrants into the market. And we are seeing companies like Neste who are investing and producing sustainable fuels, but we're not seeing as much action on the part of the traditional fuel suppliers, and that's disappointing. And again, where they have been mandated, France is a great example of this, where they've been mandated to provide a blend, 1% blend, and they haven't been producing it. They are fined for not meeting the mandate, but they don't care. They're just passing those fines on to the airlines, who have no choice but to use the project. So this is clear evidence where these mandates make absolutely no sense whatsoever. You mandate the fuel company to produce it. If they don't produce it, they get fined. They don't care if they're fined, because they know that they have they're in effect monopoly suppliers, and the airlines have no choice but to take the product that they give them. And they're just passing those fines on to airlines, who ultimately will have to pass those fines on to consumers. There's zero environmental benefit. There's economic damage. The consumer is bearing additional costs that they shouldn't have to. And politicians are slapping themselves in the back for the wonderful measures they've taken to try and promote the production of sustainable aviation fuel, without actually asking themselves, are these measures leading to the result that we wanted? And that's what we find disappointing. So I think there needs to be more honesty in this debate. There needs to be a focus on the data. We need to make sure that decisions we're taking are delivering the results that were intended. And it's very clear that in Europe, they're not delivering the results. And I'll have to read the full ASA report. Just skimmed through it there this morning. But I wouldn't be as optimistic as ASA is in terms of the outlook. And the interesting thing that they have identified is that they say that the current price of SAF is 3.4 times the price of conventional aviation fuel. So they've done some research which is slightly, well, it's broadly in line with the research that we've done in terms of what is the premium that is being paid for SAF. And that's again based on the bottom-up, looking at the production costs, because there isn't a liquid market where we can actually identify what the price of SAF is.
Okay, we'll take a question here. We'll slowly move our way towards the back of the room and somewhere on the other side. So, Johnny, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning. My name is Mohammed Tahir. Most people know me as the airport guy. My focus really is about how we attract talent towards this industry. There was a specific data point that you mentioned there, Marie, about the average age of the aircraft going up over time. Now, it doesn't take a genius to know that if the average age is going up, that means more maintenance, that means more time in shops, as Willie mentioned. All of this is going to compound. Now, if you think about the talent attraction in technical roles, we're looking at a lot of people about to retire over the next 10 to 15 years. My question really is to Willie, but also I'd love to get your perspective from an economic perspective. What would happen to our industry if we don't attract this technical talent that's going to be able to uphold the trajectory that we're looking at?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is the concern that the industry faces. I'm less concerned about the supply of pilots, which tends to be the one that gets headlines. That clearly was an issue in the United States. It's not an issue globally. And again, I look to India for both the question and the answer. India doesn't have a supply issue when it comes to pilots. India has the highest proportion of female pilots in the world. India recognizes the opportunity in terms of investment in maintenance, repair, and overhaul facilities, and they're now looking to train their people because they see the opportunity to create good, well-paid jobs in an industry that is going to require talent going forward. I think we've got a problem in Europe, particularly recruiting and retaining skills like mechanics and engineers. Again, less concerned about pilots. I think the experience of the pandemic has added to that challenge because the hybrid working environment, which has become very attractive for people, clearly is not an option if you're having to go to the hangar to do your work. You can't work from home. So it is probably one of the biggest challenges that the industry will face as we go forward. The message, however, is this is a fantastic industry. It's an exciting industry. We've seen some evidence in certain parts of the world where people with those sort of skills left, went to pharmaceutical, went to IT jobs during the pandemic, are now returning to the industry. And the message we're hearing is that they found pharmaceuticals and IT quite boring compared to the excitement of the airline industry. So I think I obviously would say this. I love the industry. I've found it fascinating, challenging, rewarding. And that's the message we need to get across, that this is a great industry to be part of. It's clearly an industry that has, if you have the skills to be a mechanic or an engineer, your job security is 100% because those talents, those skills are going to be required for this industry for many, many years to come. I see it both as a challenge, but also an opportunity. But certainly for our industry, we have to then address that gender issue and get more women attracted into positions, technical positions like mechanics, engineers, pilots, than we have traditionally succeeded in doing.
Yeah, I would add sort of that it's really important how we talk about these things, and of course we rely on you, to help us address this. I'm not going to be shy to say that, right? So, how do we speak to the young people around the globe? If we can speak to them about our industry as an industry that is absolutely essential in terms of driving economic development everywhere, on every continent, then that's already inspiring. And if on top of it we can say that if you come into this industry, you will come into an industry that is really committed to changing its energy source. And if you work in the airline industry, you can be an active part of how we can decarbonize this industry and allow hence global growth that is both sustainable, inclusive, and respects the emissions requirements for sustainable future growth. So I think that's a very different kind of message compared to the message that does indeed tend to dominate, at least in Europe, where the message is very much this is a very dirty industry. That's not even necessarily factually true in relative terms. And also I object to anybody criticizing the activity in our quest for sustainability and reducing emissions. When we're talking about reducing emissions, it's really all about the energy source. It's not about the activity. And there's also no activity in the global economy that doesn't need changing its source from fossil fuels to renewable fuels. So that's really where we are placed, and that's what Willie said earlier, that solving our problems, solving our energy problem will help the rest of the world solve its energy problem, because the other fuel will benefit everybody else. So if we can, change the conversation in those ways, then I think that a lot of young people will find this a much more attractive place to come and work.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Gianni.
Hello.
Slowly work around the room.
Gianni Dragoni from Il Sole 24 Ore Italy. Hello. IATA net profit expected for 2025, the record profits for the industry. I think so, but I would like you to confirm that. And how can you say how many airlines are still losing money? How do you explain that? And among those, there is also IATA.
So, just looking at 2017, we had a net profit of 37.6 billion. So it's not a record net profit, and the margin in 2017 was a net margin of 5%. So as Murray mentioned, we've achieved a 5% net margin in 2 years, 2015 and 2017. Clearly, when we're expressing it, the net profit as a percentage of the revenues, we've got to acknowledge that I'm just telling you now, in 2015, the revenues were 721 billion. We're looking at $1 trillion. So I focus more on the margin than on the absolute amount. You make a good point. Our industry is quite eclectic. There are many airlines that will do better than the averages that we're pointing to, and there are many airlines that will do considerably worse. So it's a very tough operating environment, not just on a regional basis where you see quite a very wide range in terms of the profitability in different regions, but also within the regions. So there are quite a number of airlines in the US. We well recognize that they're struggling with Spirit, for example, in Chapter 11, but there are many well-performing airlines. So we don't have a sort of a number for how many are making profit and how many are making losses. We just aggregate it and we leave it to the individual airlines to report on their own results. But I think it demonstrates that it's still it's a very, very competitive industry. There are many airlines globally continuing to struggle as they deal with the additional burden that was created as a result of the pandemic, with significant additional debt that they had to take on. I suppose the good news is that the interest rates look like they're starting to decline again. So if these airlines have variable interest rates, then they're probably looking at a bit of relief going forward. The lower fuel price tends to benefit everybody. Often tends to benefit the weaker the financially weaker airlines, because they typically don't hedge because they don't have the financial muscle to hedge, whereas those that have stronger balance sheets will often hedge, and sometimes will have a disadvantage as the spot price reduces against the average hedge price that they have. So it's a mixed bag, but the bottom line again is with net margins of 3.6%. While we're pleased to be profitable at an aggregate level for the industry, there's still a lot of work that the industry needs to do.
Okay, Kathy?
Hi, Willie. You said that your patience is running out with the aircraft and engine manufacturers not sorting out their supply chain issues. I think if I understood correctly, you said you're looking at other measures. What can you do? What are you considering?
Well, when I say my patience is running out, I'm fortunate. I don't have to deal directly with these problems. I'm reflecting the disappointment, the anger, the frustration that's being expressed to me. I think, and I've been running an airline, my patience would run out a long time ago. You know, we have in the past, as you know, looked at whether there is evidence of anti-competitive behaviour on the part of some of these key suppliers. I think that's an area that we will look at again, whether there's scope for us to evaluate the behaviour of some of these key players. Because what is clear is that the industry is facing very significant increases, way above inflation, for some of the spare parts that we are required to use on our aircraft and in our engines. And when you look at, we produced a report, which I'm sure you've all seen, which considered airfares, inflation, consumer inflation, CPI, and fuel inflation, which demonstrated that airfares have not kept pace with inflation. Dealing with some of these suppliers who, as I said, are critical suppliers to the industry, but appear to be immune from normal competitive dynamics, is very frustrating to us, and that's something that we are looking at again. I prefer that we didn't have to go down that road, but as I said, I think we've been patient for too long now, and the situation isn't improving, and the performance is unacceptable. That we need to start looking at other avenues to explore, and I think that's an area where I actually play a significant role.
Okay, thank you. We'll take one right at the back. Okay, the gentleman right at.
Okay, it's not working. Can you hear me? You're not working. The mic is not working.
Okay, speak louder.
I guess I can give hi, Max about money.pl. You mentioned before, coming back to the question about the net profit per passenger, what would be the impact, having in mind this value, but also the costs, the fuel prices, and all the challenges around? What would be the impact on the ticket prices in 2025?
Sure. Yeah, so, the economics 101, right? Costs go up, prices go up, yeah? That's the only way that companies can survive. So let's all accept that as a fact. Now, on the other hand, the fact that certain costs go up, that doesn't necessarily mean that a particular price has to rise in exact proportion, because, in economics we like to say all other things being equal, all other things being equal, the cost goes up, the ticket price goes up. But in reality, all other things are rarely equal. So it will depend on how the individual airline chooses to operate and maximize its profits, etc. And I will let Willie make this.
So what you'll see in the wider report is that we expect yields to fall by 3.4%, and the average airfare, which is expected to be $380 US, will be 1.8% lower than in 2024. So there's a lot of moving parts, and the bottom line there is fares on average. And some of this can be, as Murray says, hidden by the averages, but on average would be lower in 2025 than they were in 2024.
And if I can just add to that, the report that we just referred to, where we look at the airfares and CPI inflation and jet fuel prices, you will see in that report also that the real airfare has just sort of never stopped declining. So that I think is somehow a not very well known fact, and something that is also speaks to the great impact that our industry can have on the global economy by bringing about these services at continuously lower and lower real prices. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about two reports here. One is the price report and the other one is the outlook report. Both of those will make sure are in the press kit by the end of the day. Take another question at the back.
Good morning, Richard Schumann, freelance aviation journalist. In your press release, you mentioned the Trump administration and the significant uncertainties. How do you rate the Inflation Reduction Act? Is that safe in the future under Trump, or will that lead to a completely different policy in the US and maybe worldwide when it comes to sustainable aviation fuel production?
So I've met Donald Trump on 2 occasions, but he hasn't told me what he's going to do in relation to that. But my expectation is that it's probably going to be in 2026 before we see any impact of that. So, you know, if there's to be a change, I don't think it's going to impact significantly in 2025. But I honestly don't know. You know, I think the general expectation is that some of the measures that were introduced would be reversed. But whether that impacts on the investments that were made to support the development of facilities for the production of sustainable aviation fuel, it's unclear at this stage. The one thing that I think is important to point out is there was quite a lot of progress under the Trump administration in the first Trump administration in this area as well. So I don't think it's a sort of a black and white issue. I think there's going to be significant grey around this, but we remain on balance. I would see it, the Trump administration being a net positive for the industry.
Okay, we'll take a question right in the back in the corner. Yes.
Thank you.
I'm Mr. Lam from China Economic Daily. I would follow up with remarks given by Mrs. Murray. You just said when we are talking about decarbonization of industry, talk about the source of the fuel, not just the activity. So, what do you think of the source of the power, not the fuel? I mean, when we're talking about the sustainable aviation fuel or the unsustainable conventional aviation fuel, at the end of the day, those fuels goes into the external combustion engine. Do you foresee the possibility when someday when we are not talking about the turboprops, the turbo fights, but when we talk about electric motors, those new power forms, those new engine, those new power plants. Do you foresee the day when the energy density issue of the batteries could catch up with the fuel, the sustainable or unsustainable? So when do you foresee that day could come? Or come at all?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we believe there will be a lot of issues that will contribute to net zero in 2050. The technologies you're talking about, we see being in the latter stages of that, and will probably have greater impact beyond 2050, particularly in relation to hydrogen, and that's why we've, in designing the pathway to net zero in 2050, we were very conscious of the need to base it on realistic expectations of what can be achieved. Electric, hybrid electric, hydrogen, yes, they'll all play a part, but their contribution to the abatement that will be required will be small relative to the contribution that sustainable aviation fuels can make. And that's why we've tended to emphasize the need for production of sustainable fuels over other technologies. And it's important, like, if you look at the, the average age of the aircraft in service today is 14.8. Aircraft are typically designed to be operated to 25 years of age, or at least 25 years, and there are many that go beyond that. So, aircraft that get delivered today will still be flying, more than likely will be flying in 2050. And that's why we need something that can address the technology that we know exists today. So, hydrogen-powered aircraft, Airbus has been talking about 2035 for the introduction of a commercial aircraft, but it's not going to make a big impact by 2050. But a great question. Thank you for asking that.
Okay, we'll get a question here. Chris?
Willie, you said that India sits at one end of the spectrum in terms of encouraging aviation, and the Netherlands perhaps at the other. I'm just wondering where you view Britain on that spectrum right now. I think still the world's biggest aviation market, but in the first 5 months of the new government, we've seen some measures which have been somewhat unwelcome from an industry point of view. Do you think they made a good start or not?
No, I think they're somewhat schizophrenic, actually. So I think the UK is probably closer to Europe than I would have expected it to be. So the increase in air passenger duty is going to be damaging. They have expressed vocal support for the industry, which is positive. So I think the words have been encouraging, the actions not so encouraging, which is a little bit disappointing. I think in that post-Brexit environment, everybody expected the UK to try and deliver on an island nation trading in the world, and increasing your taxes associated with flying, where you're an island, you're going to have to connect, particularly with the economies that they've been talking about doing trade deals with. It's disappointing to see the measures being adopted. So nothing that I've seen makes me believe that the UK has moved away from Europe in terms of its thinking when it comes to aviation. It certainly is way, way apart from what we're seeing in Asia in terms of their ambition and understanding of what needs to happen.
Have you any thoughts on the airport situation in the UK and the various applications for new runway capacity? Would you like to see all those go ahead, Heathrow included potentially?
I've said it many times before, I do not expect to see a third runway at Heathrow. I think the cost and environmental challenge that Heathrow faces are beyond anything that could be achieved. So I remain convinced that you're not going to see a third runway at Heathrow. You may see a second runway at Gatwick, but the prospect of a third runway in Heathrow, I would rate at 0%.
Okay, the question here at the front.
Hello, this is Zainab Ali from Sharq Al-Awsat newspaper. Can you please elaborate on how the geopolitical situation and the supply chain issues will affect the Gulf region, especially Saudi Arabia? Thank you.
It's a great question, because in general, when you look at the figures that Murray presented with the high net contribution per passenger coming in the Middle East, would appear that they have not been impacted by the significant disruption that has taken place there. And therefore I think it's important, again going back to the comment we had earlier, there are some airlines in the region who are suffering very badly as a result of what is happening there, and are really struggling in the current environment with everything they have to deal with. And there are others who are clearly doing well. We see Middle East carriers benefiting from some of the geopolitical issues. So the closure of Russian airspace has probably benefited the Middle East, with traffic flowing over the Middle East to connect rather than on direct services from Europe. I think the fact that there is very limited direct activity between the US and China is benefiting the major hubs in the Middle East. So this is principally around Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Doha, where they're benefiting from traffic that's flowing from the US over those hubs into China. So there's been some significant benefits for these carriers, but equally there are a lot of carriers in the region who have been very heavily impacted by what's happening in Gaza and in Lebanon. Saudi Arabia is sort of in the middle there somewhere, because they're not really getting the benefit of it. They don't have a major hub operation, so they're not getting the additional traffic flows that we're seeing going over Dubai, Abu Dhabi and Doha principally. There are some benefits for all of the carriers in the region as a result of the air cargo, and I think there's probably a case that the Saudi carriers are benefiting from that. But I think the big reason why the figures for net profitability per passenger tends to focus on the global hubs in the region, who have a high percentage of premium passengers, benefiting from traffic flows that are going over the hubs that otherwise probably would have gone direct, and also the contribution that cargo is making for them as well.
Manju from the Times of India. Yeah. You said that India doesn't have a supply problem when it comes to pilots. Now, isn't that because one of the airlines shut shop a few years ago? And when you look at the orders placed, we are looking at 1,500 aircraft. So that is about, say, 15,000 pilots in the next 10, 15 years. So currently, too, if you see airlines are reluctant to implement the new FTTL because that would need more pilots, they would have to get more pilots. And also, if you see, India is probably the only country where the notice period for a commander is 1 year, and for a co-pilot is 6 months. And that's because of pilot shortage. So how do you see this aircraft order and the crew issue panning out in the coming decade?
No, I don't see any problem. Certainly talking to the Indian carriers, they've not expressed any concern about recruiting. And I think if you're a pilot or somebody with the ambition to be a pilot, you'll be looking at India because of the aircraft orders. The opportunities for jobs in the region are going to be significant. And there are a lot of Indian pilots in other parts of the world who I think will be attracted to return home, which is not dissimilar to what we've seen in other regions where growth has taken off. So when we look at this in aggregate over the longer term, we don't see a supply issue for pilots. As I said, I think the particular challenge in the US was as a result of regulations in the US that were unique to the US. Most other areas are not expressing any concerns about their ability to recruit pilots. Some regions, particularly in Africa, express concerns about retaining pilots and are concerned about the risk of them losing pilots to growth markets like India, as they have in the past over losing pilots to the Middle East. But I think India is going to be a fascinating market. I think it's going to be really exciting. And I think one of the things that will probably attract pilots back to India is the fact that there's now investment in wide-body aircraft. So when you think of India, I think last year there were less than 50 wide-body aircraft in the country. For a country the size of India, that's just amazing when you see a statistic like that. But now with both Indigo, with their orders for the A350, and Air India with significant orders for 787s and A350, I think pilots there now see career progression opportunities moving from narrow body to wide body that didn't really exist. So, I think the market to me looks very attractive for both recruiting and retaining pilots in the future in India.
Okay, thank you. We'll take a question at the back of the room. We've got about 15 minutes left, so if you can keep your questions really short, we'll try and get through as many as we can. So, question at the back of the room.
So we can't hear you.
Okay. As you're getting sorted out, there was a gentleman back here, so we'll take that question first. Okay.
Okay, so Karen Smith, representing Business Day in South Africa. Recently in Parliament, it was said that basically plane tickets are unaffordable for most people in Africa. So in IATA's view, what can be done, what measures can be put in place to make it more affordable?
Well, I think you're talking about a general economic challenge. What we need to see is greater economic growth in Africa. And this is where it's probably, chicken and egg. Aviation facilitates economic investment and facilitates economic growth, which tends to raise the standard of living and the quality of life in the regions. The reality of it is Africa faces very high fuel charges and very high infrastructure charges. Governments still look to the airline industry as a source of tax revenue without understanding the impact that that's having. So the price of airfares in Africa reflect the costs of operating in Africa. If we can reduce the costs, then you can reduce the ticket prices. And the one area I think that should be looked at is the price of fuel. Fuel cost, the basic product is the same, but the cost of the fuel when it goes into the wing of the aircraft is higher in Africa than anywhere else in the world. Yeah, 20% Mara says. And given that fuel is the single biggest element, or traditionally the single biggest element, if that could be addressed, I think that would have a significant impact. But the margins for airlines operating in Africa are wafer thin, and the average net per passenger is lowest in Africa, as you've seen from the presentations.
Okay, question.
Thank you, good morning. This is Jose Suarez from El Aire, Mexico. Being Latin America always beyond the middle and the graphic in terms of GDP, growth, profit, what do you think are the challenges that Latin America is facing in terms of aviation, also in talent retention? And the second quick question is, what are your thoughts on the ALPA's concern about Airbus developing a single pilot aircraft?
Well, let me address this single pilot issue. I don't see it happening. I see no demand for it from the industry, and I think it makes an interesting story, but I don't think it's going to happen. To my mind, you will remain with a multi-crew operation, or you go to autonomous flights. And I don't see the logic in going from multi-crew to single pilot to autonomous. I just don't see any requirement, demand for that happening. So for me, it's not an issue. And maybe Mari, you wanted to talk about Latin America?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the temptation in many, less mature countries, is always to see our industry as a cash cow and a basis for taxation. And exactly as Willie just said, that is a little bit of a shooting yourself in the foot kind of act if you go down that road, because by impeding the development of aviation, you will impede the development of your economy. But nevertheless, it's impressive, I think, what Latin American airlines have achieved, and they have been bold in their investment strategies. There's a lot of capacity, and I think that there's every reason to believe that if they now are constrained, in any case, in terms of adding further to that capacity, that load factors will go up and profitability should go up as well.
Yeah, and you look at the geography of Latin America, it needs air transport, and I think it's a great opportunity. When I look at the future, where's the growth going to come from, it's obvious that a lot of growth will come in the Asia-Pacific region, but I would look at Asia-Pacific and in Latin America. And it is interesting when you look at the domestic markets. The fastest growing markets are in India and China, domestic markets, but number 3 is Brazil. And I think that's been very encouraging. I think from memory, it's had compound growth of about 7.6% per annum since 2010, which is very impressive, particularly given the economic cycle that's existed in Brazil as well. So I think there's great opportunity in Latin America, and the airlines there, as Mary said, I think have done a good job, and clearly the restructuring through Chapter 11 that a number of them have gone through is also positive. The consolidation that has happened there, I think, is positive. So, I think the Latin American market is definitely going to be an exciting market for the future.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to the front of the room. So, question here.
Rick Adams, Aviation Voices, Geneva, Switzerland. Do you see the U.S. changing the 1,500-hour pilot rule in our lifetime?
No, I don't think there's any evidence that would happen. I think if it were to have been addressed, we would have seen it already, but there doesn't appear to be any political appetite to address that issue. And it's politics. it's, I don't see it as a safety issue. To give weight to the quantity of ours rather than the quality of ours doesn't make sense to me, but I don't see it changing.
أشرف الحديدي الأعلام newspaper Egypt. Thank you, Mr. Willie, and all IATA team for this an important event. My question about the impact of continuing the supply chain issues in 2025 on aviation, and also especially on plans of airlines growth and economical relation.
I think the thing that surprises me, and it's probably surprised Murray as well, when we look at the projected revenue passenger kilometre growth in 2015 at 8%, given the supply chain constraints, I think that's a very impressive figure. And you would have to imagine what it would have been had we not had those constraints. What we're seeing is clearly a drive to even higher seat factors, getting up towards 83.4, 83.1. I suspect as we go through the year, it'll probably get closer to 84%. So that's clearly a very positive development. The problem we face, and we've repeated again, is we're seeing aircraft continuing to operate that really should be retired. Even to the point of view where I've heard lessors talking about being able to lease out aircraft like the Airbus A340, which I think demonstrates the desperation that exists there to get capacity. We see A380s in operation today that have been taken out of service with the view to being retired during the pandemic period, being brought back into service because of supply chain challenges. So I think the industry, quite honestly, is doing a remarkable job to be able to continue to provide growth, given all the constraints that exist with the supply chain. But it is very, very frustrating, and clearly that growth is coming at a significant additional cost because of the added costs of leasing aircraft, the added costs of maintaining aircraft, and the lack of confidence that airlines have in being able to operate their aircraft to the full capacity because of the constraints in terms of getting spare parts.
Good question here.
Hi, Helen Massey-Barrison from Aviation Week. Just a question on the cargo sector. I was wondering if you could talk through some of the prospects for the different business sectors within the cargo world, and also the regional prospects for next year. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just before you answer that, there is a cargo deep dive towards the end of the day, so we can do some maybe top line stuff, but you get lots of detail later on.
Yeah, just a quick comment.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we're very excited about this relative price competitiveness that air cargo now has compared to the shipping, maritime transportation. I think that's obviously probably not going to last forever, and but while it is still the case, that is propping up the cargo side for us. And the other, of course, big area is the e-commerce. And I think that, I have to admit that regarding 2023 and notably 2023 figures in our numbers that we have just presented, we had to significantly revise the activity upwards because we had underestimated the positive impact of both of those things. So Hong Kong is obviously emerging as a really super important hub for the e-commerce. And over to Willie.
Yeah, so we're looking at 6% growth in cargo ton kilometres, which takes it almost 15% above where it was in 2019. And cargo contributing 15.6% of total revenues for the industry. And when you consider back in 2019, cargo contributed 12% of revenues. I think it highlights once again the importance of cargo, not just in terms of the activity, but also the revenue contribution that cargo makes. So it's continuing to contribute well above what would be the long-term average for contribution. And I think the outlook for 2025 remains quite positive for cargo, given the issues Mario has highlighted.
Okay, we'll take the question here at the front. Yeah.
Good morning. I am a journalist from Mercury Inversión from Chile, Marcos Lerner, and I would like 2 questions. What will be the impact of a new travel ban and Trump trade wars on passenger and cargo business?
Well, to be honest, we don't know. I think if we look back on the first Trump administration, it didn't have a very significant impact. I think it generated a lot of headlines, but in terms of the impact on passenger traffic or cargo traffic, it wasn't really one of the issues that stood out in terms of having an impact during the period of his administration between 2016 and 2020, which was a period of significant growth up until the period of the pandemic. So 2019 was one of the strongest years for our industry. So difficult to say, but if the past is an indication of what's likely to happen in the future, I don't think it's going to have a significant impact.
Okay, question here.
Hi. Hello. Yeah. Manoj Ramohan from Press Trust of India. Earlier you mentioned about the Indian market, the significant growth, supply of pilots and all, but IATA has always been flagging about higher airport charges, infrastructure issues. Are these issues slowly getting resolved? Do you see a near-term horizon?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we're now seeing evidence of good economic regulation in India. The regulator is certainly taking measures to address that. So I think we're beginning to see evidence of more balance being introduced in the market in India as a result of the activities of the regulator, which I see as a very, very positive development.
Any particular takeaways in that front? When you mentioned there is slowly a good balance is coming, any particular takeaways in the recent?
Well, I think if we look at some of the statements and activities of the regulator, just in the very recent past, I think there is evidence of a regulator who is very aware of the impact that airport charges has on aviation and is more open to listening to the voice of the airlines and the airline industry rather than just the airports. So I think airports have had a relatively easy time in terms of regulation in India, and I believe that that's changing now. And certainly from the interaction that we've had with the regulator, we think that we're seeing much more positive developments there.
Thank you.
Okay. I make it at 10:28, so we've got 2 minutes before the embargo is over. We might take a couple more questions and go a few minutes overtime, if that's all right with Willie, but just 5 minutes. So we'll take a question here.
Yes, hello, Dan Kramer, the Netherlands Business Traveler. On the problem child, the Netherlands, you started with it. Why is it such a problem, and what would you recommend or advise the Dutch government?
The reason it's such a problem is that what is perceived to be a minor change to the number of movements has a massive impact on the quality of the network. And it is quite complex, but the idea that you can just reduce the number of movements and that you will continue to operate all of the destinations served from Schiphol is a serious mistake. Schiphol is heavily dependent on transfer traffic to sustain the global network that it has. If you were to look at the country the size of the Netherlands and its ability to sustain direct services to the rest of the world, it would be a tiny fraction of the network that it has today. And the reason Schiphol is so well connected is because it's an efficient hub, and the structure that KLM in particular have built up to connect the short-haul network into the long-haul network facilitates significant long-haul destinations that couldn't be served otherwise. And I don't think governments, I don't think that the government of the Netherlands understands that. They think they can just, adjust down the number of movements at the airport, and the network will remain the same. Maybe a couple of flights that will be reduced during the week. It will have a massive impact, if not properly addressed. And that's the bit that I think is very worrying, that they've shown little or no understanding of the dynamics of a hub airport. And as I said, Schiphol's heavy dependence on transfer traffic is something that they should be very proud of, having built up that network, and I think putting it at risk is a very serious mistake given the economic benefit that the Netherlands gets from the connectivity that it has, which is, quite honestly, one of the best connected countries in the world. And it's connected not because of the size of the country, it's connected because of the value of the hub.
Okay. And we'll try one last question. We'll go to Kurt.
Hope it works. Yes, Kurt, Adjustment World. 2 points, if I may. How the CEO of Turkish Airlines told me recently that he expects 1,000 aircrafts grounded currently regarding the engine issue, supply chain, and so on. Do you think this number could be correct? And how much of the European airspace and the Middle East airspace is closed? That percentage, maybe you have?
Yeah, I don't have a percentage of the airspace. The aircraft, yeah, I don't think he's too far wrong. I think we estimate there's about 700 aircraft grounded at the moment. The situation has not been fully addressed. So getting to 1,000 aircraft isn't beyond the estimates that I have heard. So somewhere between 700 and 1,000. I don't think it's unrealistic.
Great. On that, I think we'll bring this part of the program to a conclusion. Thank you all very much.